Welcome back to I Hear Dead People, the podcast that celebrates the joy of seeking truth for its own sake. I'm Dorian Positano.
And I'm Tom Asacker. In this episode, we hear from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, considered one of the most important dead people in human history. Plato's influence on Western thought has been so great that the renowned British philosopher Alfred North Whitehead declared, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato."
It's all footnotes to Plato. Well, that's saying a lot. I hope I can hold my own with this guy.
You'll do fine.
If you say so.
You will. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of joyful inquiry.
Listen, learn, and laugh a little.
And I knew I am. I am what I am.
The experiencer is the experienced.
And it means looking at things which one takes for granted and suddenly seeing that they're very, very odd.
How do you keep your center when everybody around you is losing theirs?
And the thing that you call yourself, to which things happen, is just something that happens.
So, are you ready for this one?
I think so, yeah. But tell me, what do we really know about Plato's life?
Actually, not that much. There's general agreement that he was born in or around Athens sometime between 429 and 423 BC into a well-connected and wealthy family, the creme de la creme of Athenian society. Plato had a sister, two brothers, and a stepbrother, and he was a well-educated and bright student, so it was pretty much assumed that he would go into politics. He also grew up during the long, drawn-out, bloody civil war with Sparta, and he served in the war effort for a time during his youth.
So I'm guessing the war had an influence on Plato's life and philosophy?
He came of age around the time of Athens' final defeat by Sparta and the political chaos that followed, so I'm sure it affected him. But what pretty much turned his world upside down was when he met the truth seeker and troublemaker, Socrates. Plato ended up becoming one of Socrates' students and closest associates, and his life turned when the men of Athens condemned Socrates to death by suicide. That happened in 399 BC, so Plato would have been in his mid-20s. You should definitely ask him about that traumatic and defining event.
It's at the top of my list, Tom. And I will say I'm starting to think that truth seeker and troublemaker go hand in hand.
Truth teller and troublemaker certainly do, especially when the truth threatens the established order. Anyway, that's when Plato said to hell with politics and decided to travel, study, and write, all the while thinking of Socrates and the philosophical problems that had concerned him. After about 12 years away, he returned to Athens to continue his writing, start his own philosophical school known as the Academy, and to teach.
So I know our first choice was the great Socrates himself, but I got to tell you, I'm relieved that we ended up with Plato. I mean, nothing against Socrates, but I'm not sure I could have handled his relentless questioning.
I hear you. I tried to convince him to come on, but I couldn't get through his questions about why we're doing this podcast in the first place.
And so, no Socrates on this episode.
Sadly. But no matter, I'm sure Plato will be giving him plenty of props. And look, don't get too loose. Plato was not only an eager student of Socrates, he was also an astute teacher of Aristotle. And beyond the fact that virtually all philosophy descends from Plato, the guy was also a mathematician and a gifted writer. His dialogues, I think there are about 35 of them, cover topics ranging from metaphysics, ethics, and political theory to psychology, the theory of art and knowledge, education, religion, and love, just to name a few.
To name a few. Okay, so how the hell am I supposed to get to the essence of this guy's ideas in under an hour?
Yeah, it probably ain't happening. So here's what I'd do. Lob a few softball questions to start. Ask him about his favorite hobbies or something. And then dive into a few topics that are on listeners' minds, like, I don't know, media and the future of democracy.
I see. Simple questions. Well, look, I want to ask him about how to live a happy life?
Of course you do. And by the way, it's called Eudaimonia.
What?
Eudaimonia. It's ancient Greek, and it doesn't have a one-word translation in English. It kind of means happiness, but it's the happiness that comes from living well, being the best version of yourself.
Eudaimonia. You mean following one's bliss? Living a fulfilling, meaningful life?
Or being true to one's essence, one's daimon, despite the tension and obstacles. Hey, maybe that's where the expression eudaimon came from. Get it?
Or maybe it's where eudaimoniac came from.
Same thing.
Plato, thanks for joining me today on I Hear Dead People.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice studio.
Yeah, thanks. I like it.
I'm sure it will suit us well. But please try to remember, the measure of a man is what he does with a microphone.
Okay, then. Well, this is going to be fun. So, quick question. Is it just Plato or Mr. Plato?
Just Platon.
Is that short for something? Platonymous, maybe?
Platonymous, mother of Zeus. The word Platon in Greek means broad, wide. My wrestling coach gave me that name, probably because of my physique. Platon hit shout, shoulders up. I was never pinned in competition, not once.
Well, that makes more sense. I read somewhere that Plato means thick and that it had something to do with your head, which sort of threw me for a loop, given what else I know about you. But anyway, please tell us about your background. You were born into a prominent family and grew up in the amazing city-state of Athens. I mean, the Parthenon, the Acropolis. Tell me, what was it like?
Athena was a beautiful city, named after Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare.
Wisdom and warfare. Sounds a bit oxymoronic, don't you think? Kind of like Civil War or Living Dead.
Paradoxical, yes, but the goddess Athena is a myth, after all.
And I've learned that there are truths in myth. So I guess ancient Athens was an intellectually stimulating and exciting place.
Indeed, with theaters, fine baths, and beautiful arcades, science and art were flourishing, and citizens were intensely involved in the philosophy, politics, and athletic contests.
Wait, did you say arcades? I didn't realize pinball was a thing 2,500 years ago.
I'm not referring to your silly places of so-called games of skills. I'm talking about majestic Greek architecture. I'm sure you've seen them. Open structures of long hallways in temples, gymnasiums, and merchant centers with a series of arches supported by columns.
I see. And when you say citizens were involved in philosophy, politics, and athletics, you mean free men, right? Because as far as I understand, women and slaves, who were the majority of the population, weren't allowed to participate in any of what you've just described, which I find bizarre for a place we now call the birthplace of democracy. Well, I suppose you were democratic within your elite circle. All right, let's maybe not go there.
Let's not. Although you may want to reach out to the woman who came to my academy.
Oh, I didn't know that women attended your academy, and perhaps we will.
Please do, but attended is not really an apt account. The academy was not like your universities, with credentials, grades, and degrees. It was a public center for discussion, free to everyone, to learn how to think philosophically.
I see. Okay, well, let me ask you, if Athens was so vibrant, then why were all your statues, of gods and heroes and the busts of your important male citizens the same pasty white color?
They weren't. They were elaborately painted in brilliant colors and adorned with gold and silver. But like many great people and works, time has erased and distorted their true character.
And now people idolize white marble statues.
One of the many ideas born of a mistake.
And I suppose that's why you wanted to get all of Socrates' ideas down on papyrus.
That's right. The inscrutable street philosopher never wrote anything down.
Was Socrates a street person?
He certainly looked like one, but no, he had a home and a family.
I've read that he walked around barefoot in a dirty robe and that he carried a stick and looked pretty intimidating with his long hair and bulging eyes.
The gadfly was certainly no slave to fashion, nor was he the physical idea of beauty.
No Brad Pitt then.
Hardly.
So you were the prized student and close friend of that gadfly. So tell us about him.
Of all the men I've known, Socrates was the wisest and the most just. I met him in the marketplace with my uncle when I was around 20. I suppose Socrates would have been in his early 60s. Nevertheless, I was immediately drawn to his youthfulness, his curiosity, passion, and intellect, especially while stirring up the Sophists and teaching young men how to reason. The guy could outthink and outtalk anyone.
Reminds me of someone I know. And who were the Sophists?
They were traveling teachers as well. But let me tell you who they really were by contrasting them to Socrates, because what Socrates did was different. It had a much higher aim. Now, it may sound strange to you, but despite his brilliance, Socrates had no concern whatsoever with wealth and status. He embraced a hand-to-mouth existence and never took money for what he did.
Hmm.
In fact, he adamantly insisted that he was not a teacher.
But I thought you were his student.
Not to Socrates. No one was, because he didn't believe in the teacher-student dynamic, an authority figure transferring information for someone else to passively receive.
I see. I suppose that's why he asked all of those bizarre questions.
It could appear that way to the empty-headed.
Huh.
No offense.
None taken.
You are inquisitive, which is quite commendable. But you see, Socrates was participating with people in a generative, ever-changing conversation in order to help them free themselves from their false beliefs and self-deceit, and thus to know how to live.
Ah, know thyself.
Indeed, how many times have I heard the aphorism burst forth from his mouth? He'd engage in deep conversations with anyone and everyone, young and old, male and female, slave and free, rich and poor, for the pure love of wisdom, philosophia, and for the heartfelt well-being of the individual and of society.
And the Sophists?
The Sophists were charlatans and prostitutes. They weren't interested in what was real, true, and good.
Oh.
They charged exorbitant fees as professional wise men to write speeches and to teach rhetoric.
The art of persuasion.
More like the art of making the wrong idea appear to be right, which they sold to their rich clients, so that those men could use what they learned to advance their personal interests, whatever they happened to be.
Sounds like political propaganda. And obviously the Sophists profited from their own wisdom.
Their knowledge ought to be called cunning rather than wisdom. You know how it works. The Sophists claimed to be teaching arete, moral virtue, excellence, but everything was relative to them. What they really believed was that the only thing that mattered in life was to get what you want. And the only way to get what you want was to persuade people to give it to you. And if you have to deceive people or bend the truth, so be it.
So the Sophists claimed to be teaching arete, or excellence, but they really weren't. You know, getting people to believe what you want them to believe is still a thriving business, inside and outside of government. You should see the bullshit we spend our time and money on today.
It has always been so. And that's what Socrates was trying to get people to see. Both their own tendencies to deceive themselves, as well as to be aware of the deception of others.
Those others being people in power?
Or those with influence, yes, which is why he believed that arete was excellence in the moral realm, in the realm of reasoning, and in the societal realm. Arete is as necessary for the polis as it is for the individual.
By polis, you mean the city-state, right?
Yes, since politics and culture are inseparable.
Got it. And so by engaging in what many have described as frustrating and annoying conversations with people, Socrates believed what? that those in political influence would eventually come to see the moral failings of their self-serving ways?
Are you being sarcastic?
Well,
Please remember who we are talking about here. The priestess of the oracle at Delphi, while channeling the god Apollo, said, "No one is wiser than Socrates."
wow. And so how did that not go to his head?
Simple. He was wise and deeply self-aware. He was initially confused by the statement because he considered himself to be ignorant of many things. And so he started questioning people to find out the truth. And what he discovered was that people who declared themselves to be wise were ignorant of their own ignorance, whereas Socrates was aware of his ignorance. He knew what he did not know, and that's what made him the wisest of them all.
Reminds me of something Shakespeare wrote. He said, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be the fool."
Shakespeare was a wise soul.
One of the wisest. Actually, he'll also be coming on the podcast. So Socrates must have been aware that his Socratic method was never going to eliminate various power dynamics. In fact, it seems to me that he may have been simply pissing off powerful people on purpose.
What do you mean, method? His exchanges with people weren't rhetorical techniques. It was a way of being.
I see. And a way of thinking.
Indeed, the talking of the soul with itself, in order to be in a relationship with others and to feel what is most true and alive for someone. Do you see? It's not a method because there are no preconceptions or goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when you think about it, he wasn't really in relationship with others, meeting souls, as you say. If all that he met were people's self-deceptive, resistant minds.
Of course, he was aware of all of this. He understood how the world operates. But that wasn't going to stop him from being true to his inner spirit. And in fact, I wouldn't be speaking with you today if it hadn't been for Socrates' self-awareness and compassionate courage.
Yes, I see that. You were definitely transformed, and you're not alone in that, that's for sure. So if he knew how the world operates, then it couldn't have come as a big surprise when the powers that be charged him with corrupting the youth of Athens and sentenced him to death.
It wasn't as simple as that.
No? Okay, well, please give us your account of what happened.
I was present at his one-day trial, so I can certainly tell you about that travesty. But I was ill, and sadly, I wasn't with him when his death sentence was carried out and he drank the poisonous hemlock.
Well, try to make sense of it for us, if you will. I mean, here's a 70-year-old man near the end of his life who has been preaching the same philosophies of self-awareness around Athens for decades. And then what? All of a sudden, people decide to take him out? I mean, what did they charge him with? Being a pain in the ass?
Pretty much, yes. They said he was a doer of evil and corrupter of the youth, encouraging them to turn against the authorities, and that he didn't believe in the gods of the state, but believed in his own gods.
His own gods? And what gods were those?
His daemon, his personal deity, which according to Socrates spoke exclusively to him.
Wait, so Socrates claimed that he alone had access to the voice of the gods?
In a sense, yes. An inner voice that reminded him of the divine order that he, as a mere mortal, could not see on his own. And it was that divine voice that guided him throughout his life, never the authority of others.
So he wasn't a so-called doer of evil. He was a free spirit. But I will say, if I'm being honest, this voice in his head sounds a bit schizophrenic, no?
He was indeed a free spirit and a disruptor of the status quo. And what do you mean, schizophrenic?
It's a mental disorder.
Yes, I know what it is. What's your point?
Well, I've read that people who live in their heads sometimes become lost in thought, essentially getting trapped in a mental illusion, a self-destructive feedback loop. And hearing voices is a common symptom, actually. So do you think that that's maybe what was going on with Socrates?
Do you seriously think that he was disconnected from the reality of the world? Lost in his own imaginary, abstract version? Socrates was more cognizant of what was going on than anyone I've ever met.
Hmm.
And again, please remember, his daemon wasn't a pestering voice. It was a divine presence which gave him direction only when needed.
I see.
Many Athenians had nonconformist beliefs, but their beliefs were only used against them if they challenged the orthodoxy, especially the religious and political establishment. And that Athenian established order was one in which lawmakers were in constant relationship with the gods, and their authority and decision-making sprang forth from those relationships.
And Socrates had his own personal relationship, which I can only assume threatened that established order. I can only imagine.
That is part of it, yes. Socrates once told me of a physicalist philosopher called Anaxagoras, who was rattling people's cages, rubbing elbows with the wrong politicians, and making outrageous claims about the world. And so, Anaxagoras was charged with irreverence toward the state gods and was forced into exile. Do you want to know one of the things he said that they used against him?
Sure.
He claimed that the sun is a mass of red-hot metal and that the stars are fiery stones.
Is that right? What sacrilege. So whose cage did Socrates rattle?
He rattled a lot of cages. Let me try to set the stage for you. When we were defeated by the Spartans, about 5 years earlier, they put the control of Athena into the hands of some pro-Spartan oligarchs, known as the 30 Tyrants. These brutal dictators killed and exiled thousands of Athenians, including leading Democrats, and one of the most brutal of the bunch was my cousin, who at one time was also a student of Socrates. Anyway, after the democratic forces of Athena drove out the tyrants and restored democracy, the Athenian people were exhausted by it all. They were confused and dispirited, wondering what had led to the decline of their great orderly polis. Why had the gods abandoned them? Where had the corruption come from?
Let me guess. Socrates?
Of course, it wasn't a logical deduction. Socrates wasn't a supporter of the oligarchs, even though he had occasional contact with them, and some of them did lean on Socrates' criticisms of democracy.
Plus, he did have that Spartan-like long hair.
Yes, and he did remain in Athena during the tyrant's rule, while others were forced to flee. And even after the tyrants were driven out of Athena, Socrates remained quite critical of the democratic government. But that's who Socrates was. He was chosen by the gods to shake Athena from its laziness and contentment.
So Socrates was an equal opportunity critic. I guess you could say he was an independent.
You and your labels. He often said, there is one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. He wasn't loyal to anyone or anything but the truth.
Well, anyway, it seems like they made a scapegoat out of Socrates.
I agree. And for whatever reason, Socrates led them. In fact, it appeared to me that he helped them.
Help them? Why would he do that?
Perhaps because his daemon didn't advise against it. Socrates had the opportunity to recant his beliefs and argue against the specious charges. He probably could have spent the final years of his life on a beach somewhere. But instead, he goaded the jury. He began by telling them that they were all sheep, conditioned by his enemies when they were young and impressionable.
He said that?
In so many words. And he kept going, using his stinking wit and unbreakable logic to take apart the jurors, as was customary for the gadfly. And then, at the sentencing stage, when he was given the opportunity to offer an alternative penalty to death, he proposed that he receive free meals for the rest of his life, like the victorious athletes of the Olympiad. Can you imagine that?
Well, not much laughter in the people's court, I bet. So, why do you think he did that?
You are right. It was a tough crowd. And who knows? His arguments were often cutting and had a condescending tone. So perhaps he was simply staying true to himself. But my guess? Socrates knew he would soon move on to the afterlife, and this was his way to live on his own terms. I mean, his farewell to his judges was, I go to die and you to live, but which of us goes to the better lot is known to none but God.
Wow.
One last thing, and this is just my opinion. I think Socrates used his own trial to prove his case against what he feared most.
And what was that? A haircut and a warm bath?
In all seriousness, if that's okay with you, demagoguery.
Demagoguery? Definition, please.
Demos is Greek for the people, and agogos means leader.
So the people leader.
Yes, you see, Socrates wasn't an elitist, but he ardently believed that the people who vote or rule should know what they are doing.
Yeah. Because it would be hilarious is probably not a good reason to elect someone to public office. And sadly, I've actually heard that before.
Sad, indeed, and dangerous. That is why Socrates believed people should be well educated and think rationally and deeply about issues. Otherwise, they'd be persuaded and therefore led by someone who panders to their ignorance and desires.
Hard point to argue. And from what I gather, that's what happened to Socrates. The democratic majority was persuaded to execute an old man who wasn't really a threat to anyone.
A narrow majority, a mere 30 votes out of a jury of 501. But that is correct. They appealed to pathos, the jurors' emotions, by pointing out that Socrates was a threat to their gods and to their democratic way of being.
I see.
But here's the broader point. If we allow our wisdom, moral virtues, and ideals to be compromised or to atrophy, the resulting societal decline will inevitably bring forth leaders who will pander to people's fears and prejudices and use sophist methods to maintain their power.
Yes, well, we're seeing that play out in many countries as we speak. And look, I could spend days discussing it, but I want to dig deeper into something Socrates said during his trial, which I assume compelled you to write your dialogues and teach your philosophies. But before we get there, I have to clarify something. How is 30 votes a majority out of a 501-person jury? Should I be re-enrolling in high school mathematics?
Well, you obviously weren't a student of Pythagoras. And perhaps you should. Mathematics is good for the soul. But let us see if you can follow along.
I'll try.
So 501 jurors. A simple majority to convict or acquit is one more than half, or a total of 251. I said that a narrow majority of 30 jurors convicted Socrates. So 250 guilty votes plus only 30 more gave them 280 votes for conviction versus 221 votes to acquit.
I see. So if those 30 jurors had voted to acquit, Socrates would have gotten off. 251 to 250. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. So back to what Socrates said during his trial.
Let me guess. The life which is unexamined is not worth living.
That's it exactly. So why is a worthwhile life tied directly to an examination of one's life? Isn't thinking about everything the source of suffering?
You are confused. Most habitual thinking is not about deeply examining and testing the values that are most important to living a meaningful life. Instead, it is simply about accessing your memory and conforming to societal norms and expectations. So, do you want to understand the effect of actual learning on our nature?
I suppose so, yeah. Especially on our happiness.
And have you read my cave parable?
The Allegory of the Cave. Yes, it's all over the internet. There's even a popular movie called The Matrix, which many people believe was inspired by your parable.
A movie? I see. So tell me, what is the message of this movie?
I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe that we live in a world that's an illusion, controlled by forces beyond our control.
You see, that is why I have a problem with movies and everything else one refers to as harmless entertainment. They water and nourish the lower impulses instead of drying them up. They're like poetry, those sardonic, dramatic performances in the theatron. They dull citizens' minds into passive acceptance of the choices of their values and culture.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What are you talking about? It seems to me that this is escalating kind of quickly, and I'm not sure why. Also, have you even tried movie popcorn with extra butter? I mean, lighten up a little.
Lighten up. And you wonder why the world is full of inauthentic people, tension, and anxiety. Let me ask you a question. Does this Matrix movie encourage people to think deeply and to contemplate the greater good?
Maybe some people, but it didn't really have that effect on me. But like I said, it was entertaining and a fun night out. Where are you going with this?
That's what I thought. It's mimesis, pure and simple. It is a mindless imitation of life that takes us away from knowledge and the search for truth. It appeals to the irrational, emotional, cowardly part of the soul.
Look, Mr. Spock, Data. I was just trying to make a pop culture reference and have a little fun, that's all.
And how is all of this pop culture and so called fun working out for you people? Just look at what the manipulation of images is doing to your society, not to mention electing performers as your leaders rather than philosophers, and increasingly living virtual lives. You seem to be entertaining yourselves to death.
Oh boy. Look, let's put a pin in this for now. I'll think more deeply about what you've said and get back to you. For now, let's discuss your cave story. That sound good?
That parable makes my point, but okay, I'll let you come to your own conclusions.
Thank you. So let me set it up, and I'm sure you'll let me know if I get anything wrong.
No need to worry about that.
Right. So it begins with a group of prisoners who have lived their entire lives inside an underground cave. And speaking of fun, they've been chained together since birth in such a way that they can't move and can only look straight ahead.
Go on.
Sorry. I was just picturing a bunch of people sitting next to each other on a bench, staring at their phones. But anyway, behind the prisoners is a fire. And between the fire and the prisoners, people are moving objects around, which cast shadows on the wall that faces the prisoners. Kind of like puppeteers working their puppets.
Yes, the image makers.
Yeah, I know. Instagram, right? And the prisoners watch these shadows, believing it to be reality, since they haven't known anything else. So far, so good?
Not bad. And so what would happen if one of the prisoners got free?
Right. Okay. So again, the prisoner's perceptual world is their entire world. And if one of them were to break free and experience the outside world, they would come to understand that as the true reality. However, because they grew up in darkness, their eyes would also have been blinded by the bright light of the sun. And if they were to return to the darkness of the cave to let everyone know what they had discovered and to help them escape, the others inside the cave would only see their blindness and believe that the outside world is dangerous. Can I ask you a question?
Please do.
Why did you write that the prisoner who left the cave and was exposed to reality would be blinded by the sun?
Why do you think I wrote it?
Well, here's my take. Obviously, the light of the world is what enables us to see, but its omnipresence also eliminates the drama of the cave shadows. So are you saying that the prisoner who leaves the cave would no longer be driven by his experiences and perceptions? In essence, he'd be blinded to those illusions?
Very good. You see, eternal and unchanging ideas exist in an intellectual realm, which we can only access through the light of pure reason. But please go on. I'm really enjoying this.
Okay, but you're not suggesting that we blindly follow reason and logic, are you?
Certainly not. If our conclusions are absurd, if they do not move us toward the timeless ideas of goodness, justice, and love, then they are not very logical, are they? In that case, we should go back and re-examine our assumptions.
Goodness, justice, and love. Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Does that mean Platonic love?
Platonic. I don't know what that means, but I like the sound of it. I mean, divine eros, moving someone's mind and soul towards union with the whole, with truth. But let us continue with the parable. What did Socrates and my brother Glaucon surmise would happen to the returning prisoner when he tried to free the others and expose them to the light, to reality?
Well, the others would kill him because they'd feel threatened. They'd be afraid to leave the safety and comfort of the cave, which is their known world.
There you have it. And so, do you see? We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men, like those in Athena who silenced Socrates, are afraid of the light.
Hmm.
Now, you said the prisoners in the cave would be afraid to leave the safety and comfort of their known world. So, what then is knowledge? And what place has knowledge in human life?
Excuse me?
Knowledge. Don't the prisoners assume that they know what they will experience? Otherwise, wouldn't they leave the cave?
Well, they don't know. They believe that it's not safe to leave.
Ah, they believe. And is it a true belief?
Obviously not.
Now stop and consider what you have said. The prisoner's perception of reality is not knowledge, because it is not a true belief. It's simply shadows on a cave wall, and neither are their feelings and sensations about the outside world, which compels them to remain in the cave. So again, what is knowledge?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, you work on that and get back to me. And at the same time, we'll discuss your notions of pop cultures and fun.
All right, I will. But do you have some sort of problem with humor and fun?
Not all of it, but ordinarily, when one abandons himself to violent laughter, his condition provokes a violent reaction, and that reaction may be malicious, as when we take delight in mocking others' inferiority or self-ignorance, which is morally objectionable. Therefore, humor should be tightly controlled.
Wow. Lenny Bruce and George Carlin would have loved you. And what about the humor in this podcast? Do you have a problem with that?
Wait, there's humor in this podcast?
Now, you see, that was funny.
Okay, well, as far as your podcast is concerned, it depends. Are you belittling people, or perhaps employing humor as a persuasive technique? Trying to diminish your listeners' ability to reason and maintain self-control so you can persuade them to value one idea over another?
Not at all. If anything, we're using humor so that they'll listen deeply and then hopefully be moved to reflect on their lives and seek truth.
So you are making important points and communicating difficult truths. You are encouraging serious thought about how people are living their lives?
Well, we're certainly trying.
Very well then.
Okay, well, we're nearing the end, and I really wanted to discuss how to be happy with you. You know, eudaimonia. But honestly, after all this talk about reasoning and seriousness, I don't know.
Do you think that reasoning and seriousness is antithetical or somehow irrelevant to happiness and flourishing?
I guess not. Okay, so then tell me, how can I be happy?
Tell me what it is that makes you unhappy. Because I assume that what makes you unhappy may make others unhappy as well.
Hmm.
You see, to understand eudaimonia, we must understand human nature.
Well, I suppose when things don't go as I hope they would.
Ah, I see. El peace.
Excuse me?
The goddess of hope and expectation. So is it rational in a complex world where nothing stays still to expect things to, as you say, go as you had hoped they would?
Well, not always, no. But when it doesn't, or when something unexpected happens, it can still make me unhappy.
I see. Therefore, I suggest that you use reasoning. First and foremost, it will eliminate most of your disappointments and worries. But do so under the guidance of virtue and excellence, so that your soul is orderly and harmonious, and you do justice both to your full human potential and to the benefit of society.
And that will make me happy?
You? I have no idea.
Yeah, neither do I. But hey, before you go, we like to ask one final question of all our guests. If you could place a short message on a marquee sign in front of every school in the world, what would it be?
Esholí. Ah, yes. No man should bring children into the world who is unwilling to persevere to the end in their nature and education. Let me see. Let us put something from my dear friend and student Aristoteles. The purpose of knowledge is action, not knowledge.
The purpose of knowledge is action, not knowledge. I love that. Well, Plato, thank you for your wisdom and virtue and for being on I Hear Dead People. It's been a pleasure.
Isto epanidin.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of I Hear Dead People. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And if you like this podcast, please share it with your friends and consider giving us a rating and leaving a review. 5 stars would be nice. This helps other listeners find the show. And please let us know what you think by visiting our website at iheardeadpeople.com. You can submit comments and questions, give us suggestions for future dead guests, and learn more about and support the show. In our next episode, we'll be unpacking our conversation with Plato. So please tune in. It should be fun. And until then, listen to your diamond.